to another week of the Rev MD podcast. So this week I had a question about how do you manage and monitor your staff? So you've got a front office staff and you're trying to figure out, how do I manage them, making sure that they're doing what they need to be doing. And so you guys know I'm a pathologist. I'm all about, policies and procedures and checklists and then metrics. I think a combination of those three things are what really help you build a team where you're not having to micromanage them, but you also know, okay, is everybody doing what they need to be doing? Do they know what they need to be doing? And how can you monitor and measure results, right? Because it's really all about results, right? Patient volume, revenue, all of that is about results. So today we're going to talk about 6 different things that you can think about in your office, making sure that you've got your head wrapped around the how to do that, right? And so does your team have a policy? Do they need a checklist for that specific task? And then metrics that you can use in order to monitor success in your practice. And just for folks, if you haven't already heard, we are doing an 8-week medical billing course that's going to release in January. It's going to have all kinds of things, whether that's just basic knowledge around the claims process, front office staff, process and responsibilities, top coding mistakes. We're going to touch on credentialing. We're going to touch on high-performing teams. So we're going to kind of touch on several different things for offices. We're going to have kind of a DIY option where you can just sit and listen to the videos. They're going to come out once per week. And then we're going to have a VIP membership group where folks can join. We can do accountability. We can review metrics. So this is great if you have an in-house team or you have an outsourced team that you don't necessarily, not ready to make a change, but you need some help, kind of getting people where you need to be. And again, if you are new to the podcast, new to National Revenue Consulting, my name is Dr. Heather Signorelli. I am a pathologist by background and kind of lived in the business world of medicine really my entire career. So, started out in residency doing consulting and work on the business side of medicine for a large healthcare company now. So we started National Revenue Consulting about 2 years ago, and we help practices with a reliable and full service medical billing team that is really data driven. So we have mid-month metrics and end of month metrics. We have end of month dashboards that we give our practices. So it's lots of fun with data and metrics. And I enjoy, looking at those at the end of the month and reviewing them personally, just to make sure things are moving in the right direction. And our team really does a great job in making sure that, we're solving problems, right? Because it's a joint effort. I think that's one of the things I've learned is that it's a joint effort between the billing team and the office, because there can be processes going on in the office that make it more challenging for billing. And so how do we identify those root causes of those issues, whether it's denials or revenue downturns, and then how do we flip it back and get a KPI started so that revenue and everything starts moving in the right direction? All right, back to our podcast this week. So let's talk about a few different things. Let's talk about scheduling. So I hear lots of discussion around, how do I optimize my team? How do I make sure that they're doing what they need to do for our office? And so one of the things is making sure that you have a really solid process around scheduling. And maybe that's not even with your front office staff that are seeing patients. Maybe it's with a VA company. And so that's where you really want to understand, okay, what is the process around scheduling? How often are you anticipating, phone calls come in? What's your call volume? How often and what is the metric that you're going to set that those calls get returned? Do you have enough people answering the phones in order to capture those scheduling calls? Because I know personally, I hate having to call a doctor's office to schedule an appointment. I'd much rather a scheduling app itself. So if you don't have a scheduling app, certainly recommend looking into that. Some of the PM softwares actually have that built in. So that's a place where they can go online. But if you do have scheduling that's done by phone, then it's really understanding, how can you make sure that those calls are answered live? Because that's where you can lose an opportunity to schedule because they just won't call back. I know personally, if I get busy during the day and I'm calling to schedule a doctor's appointment, I just won't call back. I mean, it's just going to be something that I would rather, just not deal with it. And I know that's not, good patient, but that's just reality with being busy during work, during the work week. And so scheduling for your team. So, if you do have a team that's answering it live, understanding, okay, how can we make sure that more of those patients are scheduling? Are they getting the right information when they schedule? And are you able to measure that? And so to me, that means looking at your schedule and going, how many open appointments do I have per week? And is that particular by a specific physician or time slot? And so how do I look at our front office staff productivity in filling those slots? How do we manage and monitor that every single week? And so that's a good project that you could have if you're trying to fill slots or trying to figure out why, your slots aren't full. It's looking at that staff group that's doing the scheduling and understand how do we optimize that and how do we measure what they're doing day to day. Are they answering calls live? Are they getting those calls back same day? Are they, hitting voicemails and then not getting a call back? Okay, maybe it's time to readjust, our process here. This podcast all came because, I think folks are trying to figure out, like, how do I make sure my staff's actually doing what they need to do? And this is even more important as we kind of move into more of a remote world. Like, how do we know that folks are doing all that they can, that they're, not kind of off goofing around or doing other non-work activities. And so to me, this is all about, less about micromanaging them and more about, can you identify the metric to measure and put some results around that and put some goals around that for that group of staff. So then that's how you measure them. So instead of micromanaging, like, hey, how many phone calls did you do? You have a bigger picture, go, okay, we have 20 slots that are still open this week. Now I'm going to set a goal that we only have 5 slots open every week and we save those for urgent appointments. And how do I measure the front staff's ability to fill those? And is there a way that they can make sure that, they're, closing those appointments, so to speak, just kind of like closing a sale? The next thing is patient messages. So oftentimes these can be triaged, right? So maybe they're triaged to your mid-levels, maybe they're triaged to your nurse team, but our patient messages, what's the volume of those? How often are those getting returned? And what is the time to get those returned, right? So obviously you want 100% of those returned, but is that taking 7 days? Is that taking 2 days? And then what is the metric that you're trying to achieve within the office? So again, if you think about putting your staff kind of into different buckets, right? You've got maybe your virtual assistant group that's doing your patient scheduling. You've got, your clinical team, maybe it's your nurses or your medical assistants that are, returning certain phone calls. You've got your front office staff that are doing things like eligibility. You've got your billing team that's doing things like claim submissions and AR. And so if you think about, okay, I'm going to focus on one area of my practice. Okay, so maybe it's your scheduling, area this month. Maybe we're going to look at scheduling and think, okay, how many open slots do I have? What are those people doing? Do I have a good process and set of expectations around that? Okay, let's put that into a policy and procedure and then, measure those folks. And that way it allows you to understand, okay, are we being productive enough? Do we need to add more staff or do we need to have better training? So back to patient messages, again, that can be, something you task to your nurse team or your medical assistants, depending on how you're structured. And so how many of those are coming in? What's the frequency of those being returned? Are they being returned timely? And are there, patient messages that are being returned by phone call that maybe should have been, appointments that you can schedule as a televisit so that you can actually write a note and bill for it. And so again, just some opportunity for you to start thinking, okay, what does that look like in my practice? How can I, put a process around that and then measure it? Another thing is labs. So a lot of offices will have a lot of labs that come in that need to be reviewed. So again, what's the volume of those? What's the frequency of those getting reviewed? And then how do you handle getting those results back to patients? Is it, a message, to a portal that says, hey, these are normal? Is it a phone call? How do you handle abnormal labs? And so again, that's a task that you've delegated to a certain group of individuals, whoever those are. And that's a way for you to understand, okay, how is that going? How can I put a process around that? And then looking to understand, okay, how can I measure that and make sure that, that's working well? Because again, all of these little parts and pieces impact, whether it's patient experience and patients wanting to come back, or even your revenue, depending on, the process that we're talking about. And speaking of revenue, so now let's talk about 3 other different types of activities that are going on in your office. And again, this can be in-house staff or sometimes it's outsourced staff, but you want to kind of think about this. Eligibility is a big one. So we were having a discussion this week about how do you measure the productivity or the ability of people doing eligibility well. And actually, this is probably one of those easier ones. It's if you're using a PM software that has eligibility feature baked in, oftentimes you can set a trigger that says, okay, I'm going to check eligibility automatically. Okay, great. It checks it for you. It will, some softwares, our favorite is Advanced MD. It'll show like a little green check, which you can click on and get the more detail around copays and deductibles and coinsurance, a little red, triangle thing if eligibility failed. And then the key here is, setting those up to where you have eligibility flags where, okay, you pull the schedule for the day and you say, okay, how many, patients' eligibilities, are not working, right? They're failing. And then having the staff then go to the payer portals or call the insurance or call the patient and get more information so that those are all clean before the patient even comes in the door. And you should have minimal of those each day, that should not be a majority of your workload, right? So if you can auto check eligibility and then you can identify those patients that have failed eligibility and then get those resolved. And there's 2 reasons for that. One, you're going to want to get that out of network form signed. If they are truly, out of network or they truly, have no active coverage, then you're going to want to have them sign a self-pay, financial responsibility. And if you guys are looking for some sample policies, we do have some of those that are going to be part of the 8-week course. So head over to our website, nationalrevenueconsulting.com, and you can sign up for our 8-week course waitlist. And we look forward to kind of kicking that off here after the new year. All right. The next thing is claim submissions. And there's 2 parts to this, right? So the physician sees the patient, they're coding, they're signing off their charts. So that's one metric you can measure. And again, that's for your physician or mid-level provider group, right? So how often are they getting charts signed out? And depending on your structure, maybe everybody's a partner, maybe you've got employees or tenants or whatever, but they're responsible for hitting a certain metric of saying, okay, we need to get these signed out, ideally in 24 hours. Worst case scenario, at the end of the week, but that's really, it's a slippery slope. And so I will highly, highly suggest that you try and get those notes signed out the same day. There's lots of good scribe AI tools that are out there and that actually I'm getting some good feedback on. So I think that there's ways that you can kind of help make that more efficient in the office if that's a big issue. So with that claim submission, again, there's that front end process, right? You got a code for it. And that's typically the physician sign off on the chart. Then the next piece is the billing team. So are they submitting your claims timely? And for our team, we do have expectations that they're submitting those within 2 to 3, business days. We try and, 1 to 2 business days, 2 to 3 if we're actually doing the coding ourselves. So sometimes with some of our clients, we do the coding or we double check some of the coding depending on the need of the practice. So claim submissions, another really good thing you can monitor and measure. Then the last one I will chat about today is accounts receivable. And I know I talk about this a lot, but I'm going to tell you, it's one of the most important things that you can get right in your practice. And again, accounts receivable, for those who don't know, it's that bucket of money that's due to you. And so that is typically based on charges. And so there's insurance AR, and then there's patient AR. And so it's, really measuring the success of that AR, making sure it's moving in the right direction. And this is a constant battle. It's a constant battle for our team too. We're constantly looking at it. We're constantly going, okay, why did this go up this month? Okay, let's pull the data. What's going on? Okay, let's fix that. And so really, really important to have a process around monitoring and measuring AR. Since we're kind of talking about, the billing team is typically really focused on that insurance AR. Your front office staff is really focused on that patient AR. So, we were talking about billing team. So that's where you're tracking and trending AR. And then your front office staff, really getting that patient collections up front is really going to impact your patient AR. And again, both of those things are things you can measure. And so instead of kind of micromanaging, your billing team or micromanaging your front office, it's more about, okay, let's set a threshold for this metric, right? Like we're going to set that our patient AR stays, below a certain percent or a certain dollar amount, depending on how you run your office. And if it gets above that, then we say, okay, who is owing us money? Are statements going out? Are the patient collections getting collected up front? Are we looking at balances as we're checking in patients, collecting that money? Are we setting up payment plans? Like what are we doing in order to hit that metric? So again, these are just kind of 6 different key activities that are going on in your office, and or ways or strategies to think about monitoring the result and not micromanaging the front office staff, for example. And so this was a question that had come up from one of our clients, trying to figure out how to make sure their front office staff are being productive. And so again, these are just some ideas around kind of setting these goals with your team, setting up a policy and procedure to say, hey, we're going to return phone calls same day, or we're going to, implement a scheduling app, or we're going to return, questions from the clinical team, within 2 business days. So setting those metrics up ahead of time and then measuring that. And again, some of these measures are easier depending on the software you've chosen or the phone system you have. I know for us, we have a phone system that allows us to track and trend everything from missed calls to how long it takes us to return to what's the call volume. And so those are metrics that we track and trend for our customer service team. So again, hopefully this was useful. And again, have a wonderful weekend. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks so much.